Share the Load is a time to reflect on the division of labor within our personal relationships. When it comes to the burden of daily life, how do our evolving views on identity and work determine how we share responsibility? I'm your host, Mia Schachter. I'm an intimacy coordinator for film, TV, and theater, and a writer and educator in Los Angeles. Today, I'm talking to Brooke Herr. Brooke is a practicing witch and tattooer whose work centers the power and the potential of ritual. They are genderqueer, a Gemini sun, and live with their cat, Lucha. Hi, Brooke.
Hi.
Did I say Lucha right?
You said it just right.
Yeah. Great. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. How has your solo quarantine been recently?
Well, recently it's been a little bit easier because, as you know, I was sick early on. And so I was alone for a couple weeks while I just got through that, and then and got through like the period after to make sure that it was safe for my partner to come see me. And so now I'm kind of like by juxtaposition, things are very easy now because I can see my partner and I'm like well enough to bike. And so it's kind of feeling like an oddly joyful moment of the full span.
Cool. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my first question would be, do you have formative early memories of kind of learning how labor was divided in the home and outside of the home in the world?
I do. I have really strong, I'm a little nervous, so I'm going to talk slow in the beginning.
Yeah. Do you want to take a deep breath with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. Let's see. So I have really strong memories of my parents and how the workload was divided in my house, because it was a little, it was kind of like a mixed bag. They didn't divide things in traditional gender roles. My parents are straight cis people. And so my mom was like the primary breadwinner, even though they both worked. So, but like, I remember that her work had more intensity and demanded longer hours for her than my dad. So in my early childhood, my dad was kind of like around a little bit more for the, I don't know, like the shuttling of us to places. And and we all cleaned together as a family. So like cleaning was a group activity. Mostly, I'm sure we didn't help that much, but we had to like put in hours, but who knows how much we were actually helping.
Right.
But my parents were really intense about like the group clean, and we would do it all together at the same time, and Saturdays. And then my dad did it's just like, I just have these memories of like specific tasks. Like my dad did laundry, but my mom did dishes, and my mom cooked, but my dad did all the like grilling and meat. And
my dad does that too.
Yeah, it's so.
My mom cooks, and my dad will tell you that he doesn't cook, but he'll grill.
Yeah,
and he will make guacamole.
Yes. Oh my gosh. My dad he would reheat things like in butter on a skillet.
Sure.
So like leftovers. And my mom would get so upset because we'd be like, Dad is such a good cook. And she'd be like, he just heats everything up in butter.
Oh my God. That's so funny.
Yeah. But it was just, I don't know. It was kind of nice to reflect on this. And it's something I've talked a lot about in therapy because, it's an important question, like where you learn who does what. But like emotional labor was similarly like very divided by like subject matter almost. My dad much more comfortable talking about sex. My mom did all of our homework with us. My dad wouldn't do it. She'd get mad sometimes and like ask him, and he'd be like, he's really smart, but he would just be like, no, I don't do homework. So it's just this like weird, but she's kind of she has more of an academic identity. So in my household, it was like, I don't know, it was like everyone went by like strengths and weaknesses, I guess. Kind of how it played out. And that sometimes that was whether or not like it was the most efficient, but like it raised a lot of friction. My parents, there's like a lot of friction about who did what the most.
Interesting. What you're talking about like from each according to their ability, to each according to the need, like whatever that quote is from the Communist Manifesto.
Oh, geez.
Well,
cool.
But you're making me think of that because like there's what's sort of like missing from that concept is like the possibility of like learning and expanding your skills and expertise. Right. And so like if all I ever do is what I'm already good at, and that's like all I have to offer, then I don't learn new things necessarily, or I don't. And so often like teaching is how we learn best. And it's just interesting. I've never really thought about that quote as like actually potentially kind of limiting to our like intellectual expansion.
I'm actually not familiar with that quote, but I really appreciate that take on it, because it's a little like I love working where my strengths are. It makes you feel great. But when I think about it as like a model for raising 3 children, that's like a long time. It's a long time span to be like only assisting in certain areas and never really, they shook it up a little bit, but not too much.
I was just eating with my parents the other night and reminiscing about my favorite and earliest memory of like my dad trying to cook, and my mom like left me and my sister with him. And I remember thinking like, this is weird, like this rarely happens, like, she's leaving us with dad. And she was like, all right, like you have to feed them lunch. And I remember I think I was like 7 or 8. And I remember being like, I don't think he does that, Mom. Like, are you sure? And then she left, and, eventually I was hungry. And I remember thinking like, okay, I gotta go ask Dad for food. And I was like, hey Dad, I'm hungry now. And he was like, okay, what do you want? And I was like, I don't know, pasta. And I remember kind of thinking like, that's easy, right? Like that's,
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
And
I was like, pasta? And he was like, sure. Do you know how to make pasta?
Oh, Dad. Whoa.
I think you boil water. Like, I don't really know.
Yeah.
And then I don't really remember what ended up happening, if he made pasta or like, he probably made us tuna out of a can. And
right.
Well, but I just remember this whole, like, even as a kid being like, I don't think Dad does that.
Right. Yeah. This is kind of a random, but I was curious when you're telling the story, like when your mom was home, did you get to choose what you had for lunch, or was that a novel question in and of itself? Like, what do you want to eat?
Yeah, I think we would be asked, but it was also kind of like, well, you have to have a vegetable. So like,
right.
Broccoli or cauliflower.
Right. Like that's a good trick for child rearing and hanging out with kids, is give them 2 options and they
exactly.
choose. Yeah.
Do you have memories of kind of like learning about how this type of stuff was like relegated by like divided by gender? Do you remember like learning about what that meant for you personally?
Yeah. Well, my parents, like, I think, so they had 3 kids and were all assigned female at birth. So and my mom was like they went to school, or they met in college in the 70s at the University of Michigan. And like, I just have this picture of them developing like what they felt were, what were at the time, like radical beliefs about about gender roles. And so like their marriage was, they had like, I feel like they had mission statements kind of that were like family mission statements. And definitely one of them was that like you get to decide with your partner what the roles are, and that it's not defined by gender. Even though some of theirs were, they were really, there was like this, they were pretty adamant that they had like, and they really worked as a team. Like they would, it felt that they had somehow kind of like worked these things out together. It was just a perception that I had. And so it was very, I don't know, kind of like the language that I grew up with. And like, I think this is also emblematic of the time, was sort of like, even though you're a girl, you can do anything you want.
Right.
You don't have to do anything you don't want.
Even though
you're a girl. Yeah. And that was really not what that's not what I was experiencing in the world at all. So it's like a real clash between what their hope was for us.
But that also sets up a hierarchy already, just by saying like, even though everyone's telling you the opposite of this,
right,
it's not true, which like draws attention to it and still establishes that like in our home, like we operate differently from society.
Right. Yeah, I know. It was this, like their sadness, actually, I've done a lot of rounds on this, like their sadness to some degree, I think at feeling like the limitations that would be put upon the people that they were raising, that they loved so much. Like I could feel it, and their pushes against it were really, tremendously like important and supportive, and also just like highlighted, I had like a very strong sense of doom about what challenges awaited me, like as a,
I've been thinking like, this sort of question of like, if you have a kid who's like assigned male at birth and they want to wear a dress to school, like, do you say great, or do you say like, I just want to let you know like what to expect at school?
Right.
And there's a lot of, like questions within kind of parenting, and I'm not a parent obviously, but like I see this on the internet. It's like, on the one hand, do you want to say like you're being subversive to your like tiny child, and like essentially tell them that what they're doing is different or strange or something like that? I don't want to do that, but at the same time, like I don't feel like it's fair not to warn a kid. But also then like if that doesn't happen, like then there's that issue. So I wonder about that as we like move through history.
Totally.
Our future.
I know. I mean, I do too. I babysat for this awesome mom whose kiddo, I think he still identifies as a boy, but he's assigned male at birth, and like I babysat for them when he was 4, I think. And she was just so great about helping him navigate. Like home space was totally open to all of his desires. There was like the kind of support where you don't talk about it as subversive. You just like let it be free. And then I think I would pick him up from school, but for some reason she told me like, I think somehow in one of our conversations, like she had made some distinctions about at home and at school, because he liked to be naked all the time too. And she was like, he knows he can't be naked at school, but he's allowed to be naked anytime at home. And like they had talked about, that she would be there to like help him talk through if anything happened at school with his clothes. And I thought that formed a really strong, in my experience of it that one time, formed like a really strong bond with the two of them. Then she could be his safety. And I think actually that's something that in a way was like kind of missing from some of the information about gender roles from my parents was like, we were aware of the adversity and like the potential for adversity, and we are aware of their like hopes and dreams for us. But I think like, I don't remember there being a lot of discussion about like the pain. You know, there's a lot of like anger. Anger has a lot of room, and like dreaming, expansion had a lot of room. And like, you know, and I don't know. I'm trying to decide if I want to take that back. Anyway, maybe there was room for pain, but I think like, you know, helping kids cope with adversity rather than covering it up is generally a good rule.
Right. And rather than like not giving them language to possibly describe their feelings.
Yeah.
But giving them language to describe their feelings while also leaving, like, you don't want to, you know, lead the witness or whatever.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. That's a great, it's really a fine balance.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this idea of like, even though you're a girl is like, ugh,
I'm sure they never, that's kind of like that language existed in between. That's like what I found between the world and my parents was like, the world was saying, you're a girl, you can't do that. My parents were saying, you're a girl, you can do anything. And the in between, like the bridge to those was like, okay, even though I'm a girl, I like supposedly can. But yeah, I actually, now that we're talking about it, you know, I realize like how much then, well, I don't know, maybe this gets too far. Maybe this goes like into some of the later questions that, or like, sorry, I'm tongue-tied. In a way, like this opens up some whole other door, but there was so much pain happening that I had no way to name. And I think that this paradigm of like what I was experiencing in the world and what my parents wanted me to believe was possible, like something about that gap created this space where I couldn't tell them things because I didn't want to hurt them or make them feel sad. And I didn't want that to be my reality. So it just like, I didn't name or understand them with anybody. And a lot of that pain is like rooted in gender and labor and like expectations.
Yeah. Can we talk for a second about the word girl?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Okay. That's something that came up for me recently for like a really specific reason that I won't go into. But the word, I remember like several years ago at like 26 or 27 feeling like, if I can't call myself a woman now, when is that going to feel comfortable for me? Like I'm ostensibly an adult, you know? And so I kind of like made this conscious choice with my language to shed the word girl for myself. And recently I've started to think about that as like possibly kind of some inner child work that I need to do around the possibility of like being both, you know, that you can be a girl and a woman and like at the same time, or you can like hop back and forth, or that, you know, that I'm like denying myself something by insisting that I'm no longer a girl. But now when I think about the word girl, that does feel oddly misgendering to me in a way that like I'm not yet uncomfortable with the word woman, because I feel like woman encapsulates like a much sort of broader spectrum of like gender identity and expression for some reason to me. Like I feel like there's room for masculinity and womanhood that there isn't room for in girlhood.
Whoa. No, I mean, this is so, I share some of those, I think I share some of those unconscious associations for sure. Yeah, it's funny because there are ways that I still feel attached to gendered words like woman and girl. And when I talk about myself as a kid, like depending on what I'm needing to discuss, I'll refer to myself as a girl or a kid, or, you know, like something more gender accurate, I guess, like a little person or like little being or something like that. But I feel an attachment because to some degree, like girl is something I got through my childhood being a girl. And this is something my sibling, who's also genderqueer, has said, that they like wanted to keep the accomplishments that they like achieved inside of that scope. They were really tough and cool and like skateboarded and like things like, they were very gender non-conforming. And there's this way that like, that's kind of, there's like a way that some of that is like my medal or my like,
yeah, like your armor, your shield, and you built it.
Yeah. And like my sword, I want to say,
right,
was like learning how to be a girl in a way that didn't kill me and like kill my soul.
Right.
Dramatic, but no, it's not dramatic. That's life. But so and then when I hear you talk about this reclamation of it, that it makes a lot of sense to me, because there's like this way that the more I mature, the more my gender identity becomes like an exploration, and the more I open those doors, the more I feel like myself as a kid. I'm like rediscovering personality traits I just forgot, or so it makes sense to me that somehow shutting that all the way down and never allowing like a child identity vocabulary word to like come in to play would be limiting.
Yeah, I think that was what I was noticing when I heard someone else use the word girl, and I was like to refer to herself, and I was like, oh wow, like, am I limiting myself by deciding that like this word no longer applies to me, or
right,
and I am actually in dialogue with my childhood self. I write her letters, and
amazing.
and I have for years. It's been like an ongoing practice that actually, as I'm saying it, I'm like, oh, it's been a while. I should check in with her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that for somehow it seems like girl and woman are like two different genders,
right?
Essentially.
Right. Well,
yeah.
I just had two thoughts at once.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I think I'll choose. Well, it's okay. I had this thought when you were talking about it, and I like it was fun to sort of do a little bit of journaling before the session and start to see and try to like see things within the framework of labor. So my brain is in that place of like, what are the loads that we share? And when you talk about cutting out the word girl, it reminds me to like respond to some of the infantilizing or the like the problematic aspects of it, right? And like the ways that it's like used to violate and like undercut women. It makes me think about like where things are currently for me with gender expression, is that I went really far when I came out pretty recently, and I went really far in the masculine direction in terms of expression. At first, partially because like I was free for the first time to really do that, and it felt incredible. But also a lot of that was about like legibility for other people and like wanting other people to read me correctly. And so this idea of like using the word woman and like denouncing the word girl, it's a bit of a pendular swing to like have the social impact be more appropriate, or like to have the perception of you from within and without like be more appropriate to where you actually are in your maturity. And that like that it's just an interesting thing to think about that as a kind of labor. And that's like a serious emotional labor for me to cut out. And now I'm starting to bring in all of these things from that I like thought I thought there was no room for them, like aspects of feminine expression or just like full expression. And I'm bringing them back now. And it's so interesting. Like it does sometimes feel like what I'm trying to do, and what's very hard to do, is to put the labor back more squarely in the middle of me and everybody else. that
Yeah.
I interact with, of being like, I'm going to need you to go ahead and understand that I'm still in a they space. Just because I'm wearing a dress doesn't mean that you can start slipping into misgendering me, or like, just because I'm wearing a dress doesn't mean that I have to start suddenly feeling like I need to move my body more gracefully. You know, like, I
Yeah.
literally, my brain just changes so much about what it regulates depending on what I'm wearing. And that this idea of like how much more emotional labor gets heaped on. Anyway, it's like, I mean, that's another aspect of the labor, but just this idea of making sure like our values or our identity is legible to other people is really like, it's a lot of labor.
It also totally plays into capitalist systems, because like
Yeah.
legibility costs money. I mean, I'm thinking of even like a friend of mine who's a trans guy, and like when I've talked to him about his transition, like he talked about how like now, if he were to come out now, he
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have like would have like been more comfortable in a non-binary identity, and like he doesn't believe that there's a wrong body, but he did get top surgery, and he was like, for legibility's sake. And like, top surgery costs money.
Right.
It's incredibly painful. There's a
Yeah,
huge
it
recovery
does.
period. Like, so legibility, you know, dysphoria is a kind of separate issue from legibility, though they're related.
Right.
I think
Right.
when we're talking about dysphoria and like reducing dysphoria through surgeries and body modifications and hormones and stuff, like that's a sort of like internally focused healing
Right.
thing,
Right.
whereas like legibility is mostly external.
Right.
And I think that like finding whatever that balance is, so that like you feel, you know, your dysphoria is
Yeah.
assuaged
Right.
for your sake, you know, so that's like
Right.
a personal thing, and it's not. I would love to see like us as a society get to a point where like legibility was more about like personally feeling comfortable in
Yeah.
your body, rather than
Yeah.
like, I want to make sure that other people don't think that I'm like faking it when I use
Right.
they pronouns, you know, like
Right. Oh
how,
God. Yeah.
yeah, like
Oh my
if
God.
I use they pronouns and I wear a dress, like there's a lot of, what I wrote down as you were talking is like insecurity around legibility, like
Oh yeah.
how much of our, you know, I wouldn't want to be um like seeking legibility because I'm not confident about my identity.
Mm. Mm.
um like if there's an insecurity, and then the
Right.
legibility feels necessary as like a performance for the sake of
Right.
others, as opposed to like being confident in my identity, and then
Right.
being able to say like, right, just because I'm wearing a dress, so on and
Right.
so forth.
Well, and then this, I mean, oh man, there's so many things. It is so intertwined, as you said, because and I think this like could be talked about more, not because it's everybody's experience, but man, legibility could be like a whole, it's so vast. There's like, I've talked to a lot of other trans and non-binary folks who like didn't find their narratives in the popular narrative of transness. Like, for instance, that you know where you want to be located in some sort of final destination of your gender.
Exactly, yeah.
But in order to get society to essentially like see you as a person with equal rights, you have to perform some sort of, like, it's an easier pill to swallow or understand for like the general culture, or like, or well, the powers that be, or the majority, I suppose, to like swallow, if you just always, this idea of like born this way, like I can't help it, I'm born this way and I know what this way is and I know what it looks like, instead of the reality that like, you know, I didn't know until I was 20. I didn't know, and I didn't start getting glimpses that I was non-binary until like 28,
Yeah.
because I just, you know, it was, there's, and so this like work that we do to fit the model or to like be legible is sometimes related to insecurity and sometimes related to like not like oppression or, you know, like inequality. I'm just thinking about
And also like lack of language. Like I feel like language in these in like identity is like more than I think any other realm of like our existence. Language is so much intertwined with permission and like self knowledge, like being able to describe who we are, not just to other people, but to ourselves, like being able to sort of have like the language can be mind expanding in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, I didn't know somebody asked me like, do I have like, did my memories change when I came out? And I was like, fuck yeah, they did. You know, this whole like retroactively my whole life. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
This isn't public radio.
No. Right. Yeah, like all of my memories backward completely shifted, both when I like in terms of my sexuality and my gender. But this, you know, that having language or having a framework to understand what had been being felt really changed. Like I actually remember, I used to say I had a really happy childhood, and it's so sad because on a lot of levels I really did, but like actually it was so lonely. And I didn't even really know about that until very recently. Yeah.
As you're talking about that, it's like I've had a similar experience of like memories changing, and being reframed, and like some even resurfacing, or yeah, like being recategorized as like, you know, not just like this funny thing that happened when someone was like kind of careless, but instead being like, oh no, that was assault.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
But more along the lines of like the memories changing around my childhood, like comes from illness, and like understanding that I was actually sick, and that I wasn't, you know, like being a tired kid, or like how funny it was that I used to like burp like disproportionately to my body size and how much food I ate, and that like all my friends thought that was funny, and I would get like side eye from my parents, you know, or like remembering that, you know, every time I went to Cold Stone Creamery, like I would end up on the toilet shitting and vomiting at the same time for an hour, right? And being like, oh, I'm just, that's so funny that happens to me and like doesn't happen to, you know what I mean? And like now being like, oh my God, like something was wrong.
Right.
Yeah. And even things like at sleepovers, I was always the first one to sleep, and people would like poke me and like laugh at me, and that I didn't like pizza, and I didn't like cake, and like kids thought that was weird, but it was because they were making me sick, you know, and like I wasn't conscious of that. Anyway, it's really interesting as an adult to have these experiences that suddenly like reframe, like all of a sudden learning that I was sick made me feel like I wasn't being seen as a kid in a way that I didn't recognize. Like I wasn't conscious that I wasn't being seen until I fully understood what it was that was being overlooked.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's really lovely. That's really helpful reframing. Because I had this conversation with my mom recently. Or I mean, it wasn't that recent. It was like a year ago, maybe. But actually, like when I came out as genderqueer to her, as non-binary. We were talking, and I was like trying to describe. I guess I just was wanting to air some of those feelings of like, I wasn't really upset with her at the time, but I just wanted her to know, like, oh my God, I've gone back, and turns out this has been happening all along, and it was very intense, and I didn't know how to share it with you, and she was like, you know, I feel like I want to just recognize, you know, and I want you to remember, like, it wasn't all bad. You were a really happy kid, and like you had lots of happy times. And it was so, you know, I just had this moment where I said, I know that, and I don't know how else to describe it to you, except that like for 20 years, I was like, at least 20 years, maybe more, 25, I was like living in black and white, and now I'm living in color again. And I was at one point before living in color. And there's this feeling of like immense relief, and then also this feeling of immense sadness to have like lost myself for 25 years and to have lost contact with myself. And she really like, it settled in, but it was, oh, what did you say that was like made me want to go call my mom and like being seen, I guess.
Like and like reframing memories, understanding that they maybe meant something else from I mean, everything that you're saying, if it comes back to you, please say so. But like everything that you're saying, when I finally got a diagnosis last year, I was like, I had that same sort of split of like, I'm so grateful and I'm so glad that I figured this out. Like, what an incredible relief. And also so much retroactive frustration that it took this long, and that I'm a tiny adult. Like, I don't think I was properly nourished my entire childhood. Like, I never had a growth spurt. I've been the same size since I was like nearly 12 years old, and like being like looking back on my life and thinking like, how much more could I have accomplished? How much better of a student would I have been if I wasn't constantly like nodding off in class? Like, just all these thoughts about my prime, like brain development years that were, my brain was developing on like so little nutrition, like,
Right.
Totally. And I think about that kid and like going back and being like, hey, like, here are ways that you can feel better, and then also like caring for her on an emotional level and being like, I see what's going on with you, and this is really hard, and it's not you, it's not punishment for anything, and you don't have to feel this bad. Like, you don't have to feel this way.
Right. Well, and what's remarkable is that, like, when we're talking about this moment of discovery, like, I often feel, I had similar feelings when I realized, like, I could call what I experienced depression. I was like, okay, this is a name, and this has a name, and like, it's not as scary to put myself in this quote unquote category. And there was a lot of relief, and there was also a lot of like, well, everything we talked about, but then like also was this capacity. I think that's something I'm further along with. Depression is something I like have known. Depression and anxiety and my relationship to them is something I've known a lot more about for a longer time, and like has really gotten folded into how I do my job and how I do my work and what I have to offer. And so even though it like sometimes it like limited my emotional nutrition, or like it limited, the things that maybe I, like when you say I could have been a much better student, it's such an interesting thing to like hold that grief with the knowledge that also everything that you are and have been and have experienced prepares you so deeply to do the work you do now, and to even like to offer support, to others. And the way that I funnel all of, like, kind of obsessively funnel all of my painful experiences into some sort of functional tool for my toolbox is also a very, very gender-centric, like socialized behavior, but it does help me. It's also queer magic. It's like both at the same time. Me being an emotional caregiver, all the time, even trying to find ways that my pain like bread prepares me for that, is like a combination of like gender shit that I wish I could shed, and also like the queer magic, knowing that complexity is valuable.
Yeah, that's perfect, because I was just about to ask you about your work. How do you describe, I mean, I've done sessions with you, both tattooing and ritual, and they've been so like impactful and transformative for me. So I wanted to let you describe them a little bit, if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Mia. I forgot that we met because of tattooing.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah, I started, I think the work, I like found a way to combine the skills that come naturally to me and some of the like randomness of like what I've had to learn to do through like lots of odd jobs. Um, and where that's landed me is that I'm like um, I practice like witchcraft, and I share, I do the one-on-one sessions with people to build ritual practices that fit them. And sometimes that involves witchcraft, and sometimes it's like very, uh, it doesn't, it has all kinds of aesthetics that it taps into, and we use whatever makes the most sense for the client. So for some people, it's going to be just adding structure to their life. But I think the general trend that I see is that if people are coming to a session for ritual, they want to infuse some like beauty and ceremony and like and awareness. I think awakeness.
Mm-hmm.
And so that looks a little bit different for everyone, but it does there are some through lines, and just finding ways to expand um, the moments when they feel the most drawn into their own life, or like tapped into themselves, or finding ways to acknowledge big life changes, positive and negative, with some sort of symbolic action and recognition. And I use tarot for that. And then I found my way to that by this other thing that I do, which is tattooing, which is kind of ceremonial in its own. It was ceremonial before I knew that it was. And it really taught me how to hold that kind of space with others. And been tattooing for 5 years.
Wow.
I'm self-taught.
Let's talk about that process a little bit. Can I share like how, I mean, I don't remember how I found your Instagram, but I was particularly drawn to it because you were drawing vessels at the time.
Yeah.
And I was a ceramicist at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really drawn to like the minimal line work, and then finding out that you were also hand poking.
Mm-hmm.
That like really spoke to me as like a process oriented person.
Yeah.
And a person who was really interested in like slowing down. You know, ceramics is like a technology that has not been updated in, you know, like thousands of years, aside from making kills electric instead of gas or fire. So I was really drawn to that. And then I believe I reached out to you, and you said, and I was like, I don't know what your process is, but like, I'd love to get a tattoo with you. And you said like, well, tell me what's going on in your life, basically. And at the time, I had come back from a ceramics residency in Japan, and I was like, you know, I'm kind of working on this, like the artist's relationship to their ego, and like what, you know, how much do I need to kind of believe in myself and like promote that and share that, and how much can I like maintain kind of humility and like you know, modesty. And then I went to LA, and so we had to reschedule.
That's right.
And then I decided I was moving to LA, and so I believe I wrote to you like from the plane, and I was like, yeah, and I was like, everything has changed, and I'm now pretty sure, that I'm moving home to like where I'm from, which was a place that I like wholeheartedly rejected for many years. And then when I got to your studio, you had these like what I read as like timelines with a bunch of knots dripping down from them, and then you had a bunch of loops. And then we ended up combining them. So now I have a knotty loop on my arm. And then amazingly, I ended up staying in New York for a little while to kind of deal with some heart-centric issues that I had lingering and needed to sort out. And then now like this essentially like timeline loop that I have on my arm is like, it's kind of this cyclical thing where it's like, I can look at my entire life as being on that loop, in which case, like, I don't know where I'm at on it now. I
Mhm.
can also look at like a single day on that loop, or a week
Right.
on that loop, or a month or a year or a chapter on that loop.
Mm.
Um, and that tattoo means a whole lot to me. So that's just for anyone who's interested in how getting a tattoo with you works. That's how it goes. But also your aesthetic has changed a lot since then.
Yeah. Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think you went through like a figurative phase, right? And that's
Yeah.
when I got this woman on my
Yes.
other arm. But now you're doing, I don't know, can you talk about like where it's at now?
Totally. Yeah. I also, it's so sweet. And like, I think we did this all via DMs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Everything is different. Yeah. I think like, when back then I was still really understanding, I didn't really understand what it was. The practice was like a lot broader and had a lot less shape. And those moments were when like those connected for me, what kinds of questions I need to ask my clients, what information do I want and when do I want it? And like the like it was the first time I was trying to tattoo full time, I think, at that point. And so I was just all in and I was working all the time, and it was like, people were inquiring through all avenues, and getting mature in this work has meant like really getting specific about how I want to be contacted, what information I need, when I need it, how I take it in. And so I steer people a lot more. And it's interesting because a lot of people who worked with me back then had a less, what you're describing is quite similar to what I do now.
Hmm.
But there was a lot of like, I was doing a lot of custom drawings that were,
Right.
sort of on the edges of my interest. Aesthetically, I got kind of bored with, um, well, I guess I moved. I'm a Gemini, so change has to come often. So I've moved into doing more with shading, less with
Yeah.
line work, and much more abstract. Um, I I went to Sicily in the fall, and I think that that place did a lot of, I did a lot of resets while I was there and a lot of initiation. Um, but one of them is like I came back and I was just drawing totally different things, a lot of windows and portals and archways and passageways.
And
And
you found a family member through that.
that's right. I
That
did.
story, I mean, you can share that story. We have to wrap up soon, but I think you
I
should share that
know. I
story if
know.
you're willing.
I Yeah, totally. I know. I feel sort of like I feel strangely like I got stuck in a gender vortex, which I can do and like I love to talk about, but I feel a little bit bad because
No, I'm
we're
so glad we
there.
went there.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I found a family member by those drawings. So my family one part, my grandfather on my dad's side is from Sicily, and with um, I work with ancestral spirits in my own magic practice. And I've I went to Sicily. I don't know any living family there. I'm sure they exist, but I went just to like reconnect with the land. There's a lot of there's like some sadness and fracturing associated with family for me in general. And so it was this really beautiful thing to get to go and like bridge, um, just go directly to the land and work with the dead instead of the living and let them like guide me. I didn't really plan my trip very much. I just went back to the last place that we know they were.
Hmm.
And, and I met like a true angel there, who, anyway, now I'm really digressing, but my host in the place where my family was from was really touched by why I was there and really helped me a lot. Um, and so it was in her home that I was staying in. Like, I drew this drawing, put it on Instagram. Someone DM'd me and wanted it as a tattoo. And then we got delayed for months and months. And, finally, like we arrived to the day that we're going to do this tattoo, and they come and they're really sweet and gentle and wonderful, and like, want to talk a little bit about what the drawing means to them, and want to talk a little bit about what it meant to me and why I drew it. And in the course of this conversation, it becomes clear that like for both of us, it's related to work that we're doing with ancestral spirits, and that's the drawing reminded them of, the story and like experience they've had working with a spirit from their family. And I told them I had drawn it in Sicily, and they want to know why I went there. I told them family. And kind of like through the course of this, they're walking around, and I'm setting up to tattoo, and they're walking around my studio, and they saw my license where I have my full name, which has my Sicilian last name because my name is hyphenated. And I don't use Cardillo usually. I don't know why, but apparently just so that I could have this beautiful secret.
Yeah, right.
And so they're like, oh, weird. My family, like my Sicilian side, they're also named Cardillo. And I was like, oh yeah, it's a really common name. They're probably from Agrigento, the same like region that my fam's from, or maybe they might be. And I had no inkling that they were a relative for like majority of the conversation, but we
Didn't
just
a recipe come up? Wasn't there?
Yeah. Like step by step. And I think, they really they were like, something is up. And I was just so blasé setting up, like, we're not related. And then finally I said something, I said something about the family, the personalities, and like some of the trajectory that my parent has specifically had inside of the family. And it was characteristic enough that they were like, wait, do your Cardillos have like a really old sausage maker that's been in the family for years and years, and they have annual sausage parties? And I was like, yeah, there is a sausage maker. I've never been to one of the sausage parties because we haven't spent a lot of time with them, but in my teens or whatever. But anyway, yeah. So the sausage maker was the key, and we realized, and then they named some cousins, and we realized that their grandma and my grandpa were brother and sister. So
that is amazing.
And they were like wearing their grandma's ring
at
the time. And they said the most beautiful thing as soon as I got heart palpitations. I had to stop tattooing because I'm in the middle of putting something in their skin.
Right.
I was like, oh, I gotta stop. And then, there was just such a beautiful synchronicity to it because they're also non-binary, and we both never really, we talked a bit about experiencing like safety and familiarity in family being something like we didn't necessarily ever anticipate. And I think my body's nervous system is so used to performing in front of family and not performing in front of my clients that it started to like glitch out.
Yeah.
And they said, just think about how many spirits are in the room right now laughing at their handiwork.
Yeah.
So yeah, now, my cousin Lou lives like a couple subway stops away. And
wait, it's Lou?
It's not Lou. It's not Lou, our friend Lou. Oh. It's a different Lou, L-U.
Okay. Oh my God.
That would have been too much. No, that's just another magic sibling out there.
Wow. Gosh, that is so incredible. And like, had you never just decided to like do that work for yourself, you just never would have met this family member. And also amazing that you like went all the way to Sicily to reconnect with family, and then it turned out your family was in Brooklyn.
I was in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
It was so ridiculous. I mean, and my immediate feeling like was this is why I went. I mean, I went for so many reasons that it nourished me on so many levels, but there was this like feeling that I went because literally in a session, the ancestors were like, you have to go. And Lou, our friend, Lou, not my cousin, who does these incredible sessions, had asked me one day how I wanted to celebrate like a little breakthrough I was being the client while they were the practitioner. Cool. And they said, how do you want to celebrate? And I said, I want to go to Sicily. And it was something that like I was in my ether, but I didn't think I would ever do. So talk about like a web of support. Yeah. And I mean, if not for their support as a spiritual practitioner, I wouldn't have zeroed in. I wouldn't have gone to Sicily. And
right.
And
then, and Lou, our friend Lou, because I told them about your tattoos and they got a tattoo from you.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And they were my first client. They were my first official ritual client. I think I like mentioned it to them while I was giving them a tattoo. And I don't know, it's just the kind of, it makes me think about, I just felt so seen. All of these situations are like experiences of being seen and understood. But yeah, Lou was Lou was so ready to do ritual, like more ready than I was. They often were like, I think you're supposed to help me with this. I was like, I don't know. That kind of seems like heavy lifting or like very serious. I'm not sure I'm qualified. And they were like, you booked me for a ritual session.
Well, and Lou also got you your precious baby kitty.
My precious baby kitty. Lou was there. Lou, I think, is directly this is not cousin Lou, friend Lou.
Yeah.
Lou was there the day before my this big breakup from my last partnership, which was a heterosexual partnership, and shortly thereafter I came out as genderqueer and like pansexual, or so I feel often like Lou has been a real angel. Yeah, I mean, whoa.
Yeah.
They were incredible.
That's
yeah.
Okay. There's one last thing that I want to ask you before we wrap up, because it's specifically about boundaries in your work, because I think emotional labor, it's really hard to have boundaries around that. And a lot of what you do, I think, sort of like bleeds into what a lot of people would maybe not consider like work. So like the tattoos, I think, are really clear. Like no one's going to text you and be like, hey, can you tattoo me for no money? But people, I have often had to stop myself from being like, hey, Brooke, I need advice on this like ritualistic thing. Or, hey, Brooke, like this is my tarot reading this morning. Like, what do you think of this? And it'd be different if you were maybe in a space where you were like, hey, I'm thinking about getting into this work and blah, 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 and then I could be like, well, here's like a practice opportunity for you, for example. But like, how do you identify, set, and maintain boundaries around the work that you do? Because so much of it is like, could be classified as emotional labor. It's not a lot of it's not like tangible. It's not visible. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. Yeah. Well, I am gonna like let it kind of be a little stream of consciousness, and then I'm literally just gonna spout all the things and then I'm gonna articulate them. Like,
great.
first comes to mind, or most recent thing that came to mind was this idea of sharing the load. That's coming into play lately, where I don't have to hold all the boundary. So if someone texts me inappropriately, I don't answer, because it's not my, like, this happens frequently at midnight. I'm like trying to answer someone, take care of them in ways that are really harmful to me, not the person harming me harming me, because I'm not acknowledging my limits. My therapist we did this whole session on limits. So I feel like I have to credit her, because I really didn't even have this word for it until recently. So understanding my own limits,
the limitations of your resources.
Yeah. And being comfortable that I have limits is a huge struggle.
Yeah.
And that is something I'd say that's like, I'm currently working on that. And then I didn't spout them. I just went in. Following one way that building boundaries happens the most naturally for me is like following the observations about what is happening can really help you build efficient boundaries. Like, I was insisting that my sessions be an hour, and they're consistently an hour and a half. It just always happens. And so one day I was like, just call them an hour and a half on your website. Like, for God's sake, it's always 90 minutes. And just observing that and how it changed my relationship to being paid appropriately, even though I didn't raise my rates. I just stopped feeling bad about my rates, because I was like, it's an hour and a half. It's like not even an hour. It's extra. It changed my relationship to what was happening during that last half hour, instead of feeling like maybe someone had somewhere to be, or So I think that to some degree, the boundary making, it like has to follow the logic of the work a little bit, which is not something that that's not something I like read about with boundaries. That's something that I used to feel guilty at my inability to create boundaries. Like, I'm keeping it an hour because that's what I said I would do. And that the reality that works for me is much more flexible. like if it happens enough times, then I need to do something about it. I need to change the format, and allowing the format to be mutable has been like the primary tool that I use to keep myself healthy, and to keep it creative. So it's kind of interesting because like usually if I'm feeling depleted, I feel a sense of accountability, like there's something that's broken with the way I'm structuring it, because I shouldn't be feeling depleted after this work. And that's been pretty like true and helpful. And it's helped me zero in on like when my rates have been too low, because it's definitely happened many times, or when the time needs to be longer, or when the reason I feel depleted is that I answered the text message when I didn't want to. You have to have a moment then when you're like, this person's an adult and I'm going to let them be an adult and come to understand in their own time what they just asked of me, and why, why I'm limited. And I'll understand in what ways I maybe like enabled that, or, but hearing you say that also makes me think that maybe I should have an option for people who are recurring clients. Like if you, for instance, if you were like, hey, I need a little advice, but I don't need a full session. Maybe I should have a way that I say, sure, let's do a phone consult for 20 minutes and it's like pay what you wish, or, where we already have a relationship, so that, and that's what I mean about it being mutable, because I could just sit here and kind of like guard these boundaries, but that's another sort of labor that I don't really like, actually. I really like when people have avenues to treat me well. And I really don't like when those avenues are few,
Right. I love the idea of having like the option of like a check-in with you, where, it's a 10-minute option or a 20-minute option. And someone that I was doing this with on Instagram, like did offer to pay me. And I was like, you know what, like use that money to like buy these 2 books that I recommended, and then just like share things that I post on Instagram with people, like share the wheel and share stuff like that. Like that's how you can pay me,
Right.
And this is like a pretty young person that I know is not, like I don't want to take your money.
I just want to talk to you forever.
Yeah, I know. We really do have to wrap up. We're like at an hour right now. And I just wanted to ask you, if you can share 3, like whether it's people, books, movies, music, experiences, or relationship, anything like that, anything that you would say are like so formative for you that they are kind of directly related to why you are exactly where you are right now in your life.
Oh my God. This question gave me so much pain. I was like, I need 20 at least. Like I can't. So I told myself I was going to decide in the moment, because I wrote 3 pages and it wasn't everybody, or everything. It's just, and then I wanted to say, like, it's a beautiful question, because in writing 3 pages of,
I love that,
formative, like stuff, media, books, people, I felt, it's so easy to feel alone, just period, in the world, and like, let alone right now. There's a lot, I feel very dismal, and like, when you're in a situation like this, and you're literally like your own, all of the like systems that you're a part of are not able to support you. It was so beautiful to meditate on how deeply supported I have been by so many people and pieces of art, and like it was incredible. So I think everyone should try to do it. And you'll probably send a lot of thank you texts afterward. But I found I'm going to do, I'm going to do 3 like you asked.
Okay.
It's hard. I wanted to talk, I tried to do a children's book, because those were really, I'm a visual artist, and I think Goodnight Moon is still a book that impacts like the visuals of my literal nighttime dreams. Like I think that reading that before bed and having that those images, and like the kind of it had an eeriness to it. I don't know if anyone else felt it was eerie, but night times were really lonely times for me. I didn't sleep very easily, And so the images that were the last things I saw would like just continue to sort of spin and weave, and I'd be up for a long time. I shared a room, and I'd always be the last one awake. And so I was thinking about children's books, and the way that Goodnight Moon is illustrated just really feels like it still plays a role in how I imagine magic and how I plan my visuals, or like imagine, the spaces that I'm drawing when I draw tattoos. And then in like a recent piece of media that's been really moving me is that my friend Mel had showed me this artist, Beverly Glenn Copeland, and he's like he's just like this incredible, an incredible musician and like a queer elder who has sort of described his current experience of having his music have this moment of intense bloom with young audiences, that he's like described it as kind of feeling like, I don't know, it feels like this beautiful meeting with of like a queer elder with the community that like really needed him and needs his work. And it feels like a symbiotic need. Like it feels like it's a really beautiful sense of completion for him to have this young community find so much recognition and resonance with his work. And there's this song called La Vita that's really beautiful, that's been playing nonstop in my house. And sorry, I'm gonna just have a long pause because I feel like this is like I just want to make sure I get a good one. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna go with I planned on this, but I wasn't sure, but now I'm sure. Okay. This one's like a little more practical. Like if I couldn't do the work I'm doing now if this therapist that is not my therapist, but I'm connected to through family, had loaned me these audiobooks. Her name's Jane Martin. She's exceptional. She's in Tucson. And she loaned me these audiobooks when I was in my moment of deepest depression when I was 23. And it's like I really was like dead, I was like dead, and I knew I was dead, and I knew I wanted to come back to life, but I was really struggling to like have an appetite to do that. And she loaned me these audiobooks by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And she loaned me Healing the Stone Child, Women Who Run with the Wolves, and Seeing in the Dark. And I listened to them. I mean, I like can't even count the times. But they really reintroduced me to myself. And she writes a lot about, she doesn't actually talk that much about gender in ways that it's very gendered, because what she talks about a lot is like recovering. I think you're right to be like a full person as someone assigned female at birth. She writes a lot about how to heal and like to trust yourself and to be allowed to be everything that you are, not just a limited view. And so even though she writes it because of the timing and her exposure, it's not like technically using genderqueer language, but I think those were my first. I think that's when I started to feel like beastly and magical and gross, and like in a good way. I was like, yeah, I'm fucking gross, and I like to be gross, and like my body does stuff, and that stuff is okay. And it made me want to live again in a way that I am really grateful for. And I think it directly contributed to me wanting to be someone who took my pain and then utilized it to help other people.
That's so beautiful.
My candle just went out.
Amazing.
Whoa.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
You can find me at brookeherb.com. On Instagram, I'm Baystix.
I'm on Instagram at Mia Schachter, and you can follow the podcast at Share the Load Podcast. Special thanks to Pete Ziarto at Director Pete on Instagram for recording, editing, and producing, to Tyler Field for the music, and Candace Ploy Goodman for the cover art. You can reach me with questions and comments at podcast@sharetheloadinc.com. If you find these episodes enriching or educational, please consider becoming a member on Patreon at patreon.com/sharetheload. You can also help by rating and writing a review of the podcast on iTunes and sharing it with friends. Thanks, Brooke.
Thank you so much, Mia.
Great.
Yay!
Yay!
Good job.
Good job to you.